Hi, I'm your instructor Dan Heber, and in this lecture video I'm going to be going over Rene Descartes and his version of rationalism. More generally, both his version of rationalism and his epistemological theory of rationalism and his metaphysical theory of dualism. But we're going to be covering them both in this unit. And the page numbers from our textbook, or the reading assignment for that, corresponds to pages 279 to 291 of the text, and I already have that opened up in its own tab here. And you'll see that the name of this section, section 5.4, can reality be known? Remember some of that vocabulary that we previously introduced. If we're talking about reality, that's a metaphysical question. If we're talking about what can be known, that's an epistemological question. So Descartes, very much like Plato, is sort of addressing both of those philosophical questions in tandem. Descartes is looking to know what can be known, what is the basis of our claims of knowledge, just like Plato was, and he's in that same epistemological tradition of rationalism. And also Descartes, like Plato, is interested in the question of, well, what is the ultimate nature of reality? We saw in Plato that that according to Plato, the ultimate nature of reality is a stuff of pure mentality. It is not corporality or materiality or physicality that is most real. It is the eternal realm of the forms, and of course the forms are non-physical, they are non-material, right? And so he sees that as the highest level of reality. So what is most real isn't physical, it's ideal. And whenever we use the term idealism in a philosophy class, we're not talking about political idealism, obviously, or religious idealism. We're talking about the philosophical theory of idealism. The British use a much more intuitive term. They call it immaterialism, a lack of materialism, just to avoid the kind of ambiguity that I was just talking about. So we know going in that Descartes is a rationalist in his epistemology, and he is an idealist, more specifically a dualist, in his metaphysics or his ontology. So let's get right to some of the material that we want to cover. And like I'm going to be doing in all of these videos, I'm not going to be offering a full, lecture that goes on for, 75 minutes about this. I'm going to be, kind of skipping over, introducing some of the main ideas and emphasizing some of the major points of vocabulary. And then I'm going to be referring you to the additional resources, the required resources that are embedded in this lesson. And just as we had 4 required resources for Plato, we have 4 required resources for Descartes. So let me go back to the PDF. And the major work that we're looking at in regard to Descartes in this unit is his Meditations on First Philosophy. And that's worthy of some explanation. What Descartes means by first philosophy is what you and I mean by epistemology. It's just that the word epistemology didn't exist back in the 1600s. So what we talk about in contemporary philosophy using the term epistemology, in Descartes' time, it was just referred to as first philosophy. So it's Meditations on Epistemology is another way of reading this title. So now we have to talk about, well, what is a meditation? Well, Descartes is copying the writing style of Marcus Aurelius, who famously wrote his Meditations. And Marcus Aurelius's Meditations are just slow and careful thoughts. So Meditations on First Philosophy, fully translated with sort of this updated language, would be slow and careful thoughts about epistemology. So Descartes is fundamentally interested in these epistemological questions. What justifies me in making a claim of knowledge? More specifically, what is the difference between something that I believe versus something that I know, right? So consider the statements. The statement, I believe that my car is parked out in the parking lot. I'm sitting in my office at Richard Valley campus as I'm recording this video. So we have the statement, I believe that my car is in the parking lot, and I know that my car is in the parking lot. So what would the difference of those be? Well, it's easy to understand why I believe it, right? Because the reason I believe, from the psychological perspective, the reason I believe my car is out in the parking lot is because that's where I parked, right? I parked out in the parking lot and I walked into the building. But can I know that, right? What Descartes is going to be doing here is going to be introducing this very strict standard that, according to which, determines whether something counts as a belief or an article of knowledge. And according to Descartes, if I can imagine the belief in question being false, then it doesn't stand the test of knowledge. Descartes only admits to something being knowledge if it can't be doubted, if it is immune from doubt. So notice that my belief that my car is in the parking lot, well, that could be false, right? Maybe my wife needed to borrow my car, and because she has a spare set of keys to that. Maybe she needed to borrow it and didn't have time to tell me, and somebody dropped her off here at Richwood Valley, and she borrowed my car without telling me. So now I could form this belief. I have this belief that my car's in the parking lot, but it could be false, right? Maybe somebody stole my car, right? That's a possibility. Doesn't seem like very, very likely, but it's certainly possible. So it's possible that my wife could have borrowed my car. It's possible that my car was stolen, right? So what Descartes is going to say is, because those possibilities exist, my belief that my car is in the parking lot doesn't stand the test of knowledge. So that's where Descartes is going to be going. And then he's going to be asking this follow-up question. It's like, well, what, if anything, does stand this test, right? And so that's what we're going to be unpacking. So Descartes starts off here from his Meditations of Philosophy, and he's going to be introducing us to this methodology. And Descartes is sort of expressing here a degree of frustration about how many things he had been told as a kid that he accepted as true, just to find out later that they were false, right? And maybe you have experienced similar frustrations. I imagine that there were several of you had, crappy school teachers that told you Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. He didn't. That was absolutely false. The light bulb had already been around for about 40 or so years before the time of Edison. I imagine that there are some of you that had crappy science teachers in school that told you that the tongue has different areas and different zones for tasting different, for experiencing different taste. That's false. Every part of your tongue is capable of experiencing every kind of taste. There's not some dedicated zone to bitter and sweet and salty. All of your tongue can experience all of those different tastes. I imagine that some of you had crappy high school teachers, or maybe even elementary school teachers, that told you Napoleon was short. Absolutely false. Napoleon was actually above average height for his day. That's not history. That is, the idea that Napoleon is short. That's not history. That's British propaganda. They were trying to make fun of him. I imagine that some of you had elementary school teachers that told you that Paul Revere went riding through the countryside yelling, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" Again, absolutely false. That's poetry, not history. And this one's really easy to understand what makes it false, right? They were all British. America was a British colony. It wouldn't make any sense to go riding around yelling the British are coming whenever everyone there was British. If he said anything at all, he probably said something like, "The redcoats are coming. The redcoats are coming." A lot of you probably had crappy high school teachers that told you that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made object that is visible from space. That one's false two different ways. Not only is the Great Wall of China very difficult to see from space, and only very small portions of it are visible from space certain times a year, there's all kinds of man-made objects that are visible from space. Cities are man-made, right? And they're very readily visible from space. I imagine that some of you had crappy high school teachers that told you that goldfish have a short memory that measured in seconds. Well, again, that's false. Goldfish do in fact have a short memory, but their memory is measured in months, not seconds. I imagine that some of you had crappy high school teachers that told you that bats are blind and used, echolocation to find their prey. That one's false two different ways. There are over 1,400 species of bats. Every single one of them has vision, and only about 2/3 of them use echolocation. I imagine that some of you had crappy high school teachers that told you that sugar causes hyperactivity in children. Again, absolutely false. There's not been one study that shows a link between an increased intake of sugar and hyperactivity in children. So Descartes here is expressing the kind of frustration that some of you have probably expressed. Some of you probably went through life believing Napoleon was short, even though he wasn't. Some of you probably went through life believing that bats are blind, even though they're not. Some of you probably went through life believing that Edison invented the light bulb, even though he didn't, right? So what Descartes is doing here is going to say, let's just start from this position of extreme skepticism. Rather than just accepting my existing beliefs as being true, let's subject all of those beliefs to radical doubt, or sometimes called hyperbolic doubt, or skeptological or methodological doubt. And I want to make a distinction here between Descartes' doubt, Cartesian doubt, and actual skepticism. So whenever Descartes is subjecting his beliefs to doubt, he's not actually asking us to doubt them. He's asking us to sort of acknowledge that that is possible to doubt it, right? So Descartes doesn't actually accept these doubts. He's asking us to entertain these doubts. That's an important difference. And to push doubt to its furthest possible extent, Descartes offers three progressively stronger skeptical arguments. The argument from illusion, the argument from the dreaming argument, and the evil deceiver or the evil demon argument. And there are some additional resources that I've embedded in the lesson module that go over those in detail, so I'm not going to go over them here. I will refer you to those additional resources, but just do be aware that the purpose of those increasingly strong skeptical arguments are just to show us that even the things that we feel quite psychologically sure of could be doubted. Right? Is it possible that you're not, actually watching this video right now? Is it possible that you're asleep and you're just having a dream that you're watching this video? And what a disappointing dream that would be, right? Is it possible that you're not watching this video because you're floating around in a pink pot of goo in some Matrix-style environment? Yeah, it's possible, right? It doesn't seem very likely. But Descartes' not interested in what is likely. He's interested in what is certain. And what Descartes is going to say, like right here, right now, you can't rule out the possibility that you're a brain in a vat and some super intelligent, being is just sending your brain lines of code that your brain is interpreting to make you think that you have a body and that you're having all of these experiences, right? That doesn't sound very likely to me. It probably doesn't sound all that likely to you. But is it possible? Well, sure, it's possible. But if it's possible, then that means everything you are perceiving right now can be called into doubt. And if you can call it into doubt, it doesn't stand the test of knowledge, right? So now we go back to what's called Descartes' foundationalism. So then Descartes is going to ask this question. It's like, well, if that can be doubted, if all the stuff that I'm experiencing through my senses can be doubted, what, if anything, survives that? Well, Descartes arrives at this stopping point. He says there's something that I can't possibly doubt, and I can't doubt the fact that I'm thinking right now, because I would have to exist in order to entertain these doubts, right? A non-existent entity can't have any doubts at all, but I am capable of doubting my experiences. So that demonstrates that I exist, right? And that's Descartes' fundamental, famous claim, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And did I run over that already? So yeah, so we're right about here in, yeah, the pages 288, 289, 287, 288 of the PDF, Descartes makes that cogito argument. So now Descartes knows that he exists. So now the question is like, well, what kind of information did we use to establish that? I'm not aware of my own existence because I happened to catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror one day, right? I know about my own existence through a truth of reason, because it's reason that informs me that non-existent entities can't have thoughts at all. I clearly have thoughts, so therefore I exist. The basis of that claim, the foundation of that claim, isn't empirical. It isn't something we observe through the senses. It's purely through reason itself, not experience. It's reason that informs me that I exist. So then Descartes goes through his famous "this piece of wax" example to establish how reason is what provides us with knowledge of the world. It's not our senses, right? So that's counterintuitive, and you're going to have to, read that portion of Descartes' argument to see how he makes that claim. But I'm going on 16 minutes here. I'm going to try to wrap this up. So ultimately, what Descartes is going to be saying is that what we accept as knowledge is something that has to pass this very rigorous set of conditions. It has to be a clear and distinct idea. And I have a very crude visual aid here I'm going to be bringing up. So pre-philosophical beliefs, those are the beliefs that we have about the world before we undertake this meditative process, right? And then Descartes, so you have to sort of imagine this going down, what's called Descartes' destructive phase of his philosophy. He has all these beliefs and he subjects them all to doubt. I can doubt this, I can doubt that, I can doubt the other thing, until he arrives at this thing that he can't possibly doubt, right? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Je pense donc je suis. Descartes was French, obviously, and so he was writing in French, but he also wrote in Latin. So that's why we have these two statements: cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, in Latin; je pense donc je suis, which is I think, therefore I am, in French. So he can't possibly doubt this. I could doubt that my car is in the parking lot, right? I could doubt that I'm sitting here right now. For all I know, I'm dreaming. For all I know, I'm stuck in the matrix. But what I can't doubt, I cannot doubt that I think. So now this is the foundation that can't possibly doubt it. And so then what Descartes does is starts building on that foundation, right? And it says, well, if I think, then I know that I exist because I perceive my own existence clearly and distinctly. So now we can have this doctrine of clear and distinct ideas that serves as the basis and the foundation of our knowledge. So what is the difference between I believe that my car is in the parking lot and I know that my car is in the parking lot? Well, I don't perceive my car in the parking lot clearly and distinctly because I can imagine that to be false. I cannot imagine myself not existing. So I perceive that clearly and distinctly. And then once I know that I exist clearly and distinctly, and once I know that God exists clearly and distinctly, and once I know that a good and gracious God will not allow me to be deceived about that which I perceive clearly and distinctly, now I can begin to know a whole bunch of other things in the world. So what's important to point out there is that according to Descartes, my knowledge of the world doesn't come from a basis in the senses. My knowledge of the world has as its basis a principle of reason, relying upon this concept of clear and distinct ideas. Now again, I know I went over that all very quickly, but you have other resources available to you. So I'm going to refer you to those other resources that we have embedded in the lesson module, and of course the pages from the textbook itself. So I went a little bit longer than I planned, but hopefully you have at least a good starting point to understand this material about Descartes. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go. I'll ask you to enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll be in contact with you again soon.